All right. So if you'll just like introduce yourself and your title and maybe how many years you've been in that position and like in the field itself that you're in.
Sure, yes, ma'am. My name is Andrew Clark. I currently serve as the Child Nutrition Program Director for the Pell City School System.
Mhm.
Uh, this Wednesday will mark exactly 2 years that I have been in this role specifically. However, the preceding 13 years, I was both a child nutrition program manager and then a worker before that. So I'm
Okay.
coming up right around 15 years of experience in the child nutrition field.
Wow. Have you always been in Pell City?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, as far as working in child nutrition, yes, I'm originally from California, but as far as
Cool.
being in child nutrition, all those years have been here with the Pell City School System.
I got you. I got you. Okay, so I was going to highlight a few things. So I read through like your job responsibilities that the board gives us.
Yes, ma'am.
And this was not something like I've shared with everybody, but it's not something that even I personally have looked at to look at those responsibilities. I don't know if other people have. I have not. You have 26 responsibilities listed. And that's a lot more than other people. Like the counselor, I think, was 16, custodian was 16. And then when I looked yours up, I was like, oh my goodness. So obviously you do a lot.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
and you probably stay very busy. The thing that like obviously I don't understand is all of the federal stuff that goes
Mhm.
with your job and all the guidelines that you have to follow. So could you talk about that just for a second to because I have no idea and I want to be knowledgeable about that.
Sure, sure. Um, so it kind of the way it works down is there are federal laws. The child nutrition program is a federal program, which means
Mhm.
our funding comes through reimbursement from servicing students with breakfast or lunch meals that meet the guidelines. Since they are federal funds, basically any laws, rules, regulations that are in effect at the federal government trickle down to us.
Yeah.
So, for example, like the big one that happened, 10, oh, I guess it's longer now, 12, 13 years ago is the uh, Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act,
Mhm.
which was championed by then First Lady Michelle Obama. Basically, all that became federal law, which changed basically the requirements for what we have to serve students.
Okay.
So, most of the, so like if, for example, I guess if you were to tell me, hey, why do we do X, Y, or Z? More than likely, my response would be, well, you have to contact your federal representatives because all of that is federal law. Now, the
Yeah.
states do get some say in it, but usually their option is to be as restrictive or more restrictive than the federal regulations. They cannot be less restrictive.
Okay. All right.
Can
So
I answer your question?
yes, it does. I was just looking through and I was like, oh my gosh, like I knew it was a federal program, but there's so much like, and when you're
Yes.
dealing with feeding kids, it's obviously very important.
Yes, ma'am.
So what are your job responsibilities, daily tasks, like in reality? So of course we have those 26 things, but what does
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Clark do on a daily basis every single day?
The first thing I do really is just make sure that my team's everything's going smoothly at the start of my team's day. So, if they have a cooler go down, for example, then I need to start figuring out where that food needs to be transported. Can we still serve food that day? Do we need to do anything else crazy? So, as far as like starting off my day, that's usually the first thing I'm looking into is everything going smoothly. Are there
Okay.
any other issues going on? Are there a late bus that broke down because we're required to service those students for breakfast, for example, if there is a school system transportation issue.
Okay.
Um, Beyond that, sort of my next kind of priorities are we usually order 2 weeks out.
Okay.
So, for example, the food that will come in 2 weeks from tomorrow, most of our deliveries are Tuesday. Those orders need to get to our vendors today in order
Okay.
for us to get that delivery 2 weeks from now. So basically, making sure we're staying up on that 2 week cycle. Following that, kind of just any other tasks that require my attention in terms of feeding students, accountability, making sure that we're projecting our correct numbers, that we're serving and claiming the exact meals we serve. Because if we get audited and find out that, um, you know, a school said we served 300 breakfasts to students, but we only served 270, that then becomes a very big issue if we're audited and, funds having to
Mhm.
be paid back and that kind of stuff.
How did you, when everything was free, like during like COVID and all that? I think
Mhm.
we're out of that this year, right?
Correct.
So how did that affect y'all? Did it put more pressure on you? Was it less?
At that time, so I was still a manager through most of that. Being last school year was my first year as director. We were kind of at the tail end of sort of that
Mhm,
operation. At first, it was much more pressure because we, overnight went from feeding students in a building to trying to figure out how we can arrange grab and go meals that parents can pick up safely. So that initial couple months from when did we get out? March, I want to say, was when we got out of school that year. And then through probably August were extremely stressing for me as a manager because,
mhm,
we had to make sure, could we get the food? Could we get it prepared and stored safely? Could we get parents to pick it up and transport it safely to prevent any, because, prevent any illnesses? I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. So, for example, if we sent home, let's say, frozen burritos, we had to make sure that there were instructions included of how to properly reheat it, what temperature to reheat it, because if it wasn't properly prepared on the household, that would
mhm.
then eventually trickle back its way to being our issue.
Okay.
So yeah, that first couple months was very stressful in
I
that
bet.
regard.
I bet. So how does what you do impact student learning on a daily basis and over the course of a school year?
So I kind of look at that from two different prongs. The first one being just general supporting of the students. A healthy student is better equipped to learn, to grow as a student. And the second sort of side of that is I like to use the example of being hungry. Any Normally I say if you're a parent, you've experienced a hungry child and how that goes, but really anybody, if you're hungry, you're not focused on learning, you're not focused on doing your job correctly. You're worried about when is it lunchtime? When do I get a snack? So that's what I've really come to, I don't want to say focus on, but really kind of be that mental anchor that I use is if that student is hungry, they're really not going to be performing their best.
No.
Um, yeah, and the second prong of that is something I've come to embrace this year specifically is looking at child nutrition. So the usually lunch ladies, most of my team members are ladies, but we are some of the first people those students see every day. We have a very strong foundation. No, foundation is not quite the right word I'm looking for. We have a very strong impact on how that student's day starts out and what direction it may go. So
No.
we don't experience it. Thankfully, I have very good team members. But if you come in, those students come in lunch line and you're yelling at them, that's really not setting their day up for success. And we've actually done some polling this year for some other training we're doing with the state. But I want to say out of about 1,300-ish surveys we got back from students, I think it was 1,100 rated us as a 4 or 5 stars, essentially,
Oh,
for customer interactions. Basically, did the students feel like they had good interactions with the CNP
yeah,
team members? So I felt very good when I started to shift my perspective to look at it that way, that we seem to be excelling in that category. And that's
yeah,
something we can control. A lot of people will, I don't want to say necessarily tear us down, but there's a lot of displeasure with sort of the nutrient requirements and rules and the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. But
yeah,
a lot of that we can't control. Those are laws that I don't get to set. I don't get to say, hey, we're doing it this way because I say so. That's the federal law.
yeah,
But that customer interaction is something that we have absolute control over. My teams have absolute control over how they interact with those students every day. So I was very glad to see
definitely.
they rated us very highly in those categories.
Yeah, I would agree with that rating, like with the people that I deal with on, at the middle school level.
Yes, ma'am.
How you've been in this for a while, so how have you talked a little bit about that, about changing your perspective, but how have you changed, like from your first year in child nutrition to now, like just in general in this role, or like how you treat it? How has it changed for you in your tenure?
How is it, when you say how has it changed, are you talking like how has my perspective changed or how has the sort of
Yeah,
field
so
and
how
rules
like
regarding?
No, it would be more like how has your perspective of like how you affect students changed? And you did touch on that. Um,
When um, I started 4 months, 5 months after I moved here from California. So it was a big culture shock for one. Two, I was very young. So I kind of, to starting off, it was just something to get that paycheck at the end of the day.
mhm,
And, obviously we're all here for a paycheck. I mean, we all have a job to get paid, but I have really, especially since becoming director, really started to embrace kind of those two new key perspective that me and my teams, now my teams more specifically, because obviously I'm not there on a daily basis anymore in the kitchens and cafeterias, but we have an impact. We are not just, oh hey, get your lunch so we can check mark a box. And I feel some people still look at it that way, but I've shifted my perspective from being just a check mark on a box to we have real legitimate impact on student success. And that is something I am trying to change my team's viewpoint to begin to encompass that, because there is a lot of that, we are the other, we're the island, or that's the cafeteria, they do their own thing, we don't get to
yeah,
say one way or the other. So I'm really trying to embrace that we are one more pillar of student success, and not just an offshoot that gets forgotten.
definitely. I would agree with you on that. Do you miss like being around the kids like now that you're in this role? You go from like being around the kids, serving the kids, and now you probably don't see them as much.
Yes and no. For full disclosure, I don't have any kids. I'm not really a kids person,
Gotcha.
but there are, now looking back at it, and especially when I do go to schools now, so like specifically at the middle school and high school, some of the first students that were there when I started as manager at Iola are now starting to reach those grade levels, and it is
Oh,
super funny to see them come through the line, and they're like, I know you from somewhere. And
uh-huh.
so now being a director and shifting that focus, I am thinking back to, yeah, it was kind of fun to have some of those interactions with kids. There are definitely students that stick out that, like, yeah, it was fun to come through, see them come through the lunch line or say hey to them and stuff like that. So to circle back to answer your question, I miss it more than I thought I would.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you talking with me today. I've learned a lot, and it's been good talking with you. So thank you, and I hope you have a
You're
good
very
rest
welcome.
of your day.
Yes, ma'am. You too. If you have any other follow up questions, I'll be glad to answer and or expunge on any other topics that I can help you with.
All right, of course. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Have a good one.